Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman, and tonight we're going to continue our series about Catholicizing philosophies, religions, and therapies. And we're going to be speaking about the way in which we can be reconciling different ideologies within the Catholic Church. In previous videos, we've spoken essentially about the redemption of outside ideologies. And the thing to remember is that in each one of these videos, each one of these processes, we're essentially having an analogous task. And basically what we're doing is we are taking the different ideas of the world that correspond to the human faculties of awareness, imagination, thinking, willing, relating, and connecting to the grace of God. These faculties are essentially being used by the different, whether it is the therapies, the religions, the various denominations of Christianity, and now we're moving on toward the factions in the church. All these things are analogous to each other, because there's essentially levels at which these things exist, kind of in tiers, not like crying, but tiers as in levels of these types of things. So there's an analogy between the therapies and the religions. There's an analogy between the religions and the denominations. There's an analogy between the denominations and the church factions, and there's this that's just the way that human nature is. This analogy, this pattern within human ideologies, is based on the structure of human nature. And essentially what this is all about is essentially, I'm going to bring in another illustration. Essentially what we're doing, we have a wonderful butterfly poppet here. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to move the church through a process of metamorphosis, and a process of metamorphosis that does not in any way undermine its orthodoxy. It does not in any way compromise its hierarchy, and so on and so forth. A metamorphosis that is nevertheless traditional. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move the church through these phases. And what's happening essentially is that what's going on is that there are all these different factions in the church, so to speak, that are, and we're going to use this analogy, we're going to say, okay, there's all these factions. This is just a kind of multicolored unicorn puppet. There's all these factions in the church that, are there, and it's like, okay, there's the, we can broadly say there's the, the traditionalist faction. There is there's the traditionalist faction. There is the kind of Eastern Catholics. Then there are, maybe Catholics who are kind of really biblically focused, like, Scott Hahn, folks like that who really have this, they bring in this Protestant biblical ethic. You might have Catholics who are very focused on social, on service and social issues. Then you may have Catholics who are interested in the charismatic movement. And then there's maybe Catholics who are into like liberation theology, or like centering prayer, or these kind of things. Like there's kind of these like those are like on the kind of going down toward the experiential levels. So there's all kinds of stuff, there's all kinds of groups, and they kind of go down on this kind of like, that's kind of like the gradation downward. And the thing is, there's a conflict, it's like, it's kind of the traditionalists are all like, hey, like, this is not like you could imagine the traditionalists are like, here, maybe they're the purplish thing, and they're saying, hey, you guys don't look like the original Catholic Church. Like, why, what's going on? You guys don't look like that. And so they don't look like that either, because now they're turning on purple instead of this pink thing, because they're just like, okay, like, we want to be against, we don't want to we don't want to follow, what the popes are saying. I'm generalizing here, but traditionalism as an ideology tends to kind of have that opposition. It tends to really have lots of things that are very modern, and that like every layman knows more than a priest. It's like everybody knows about the rubrics of the mass. Everybody can read their missal. It's like this is not really traditional. This is something that's new, so it's different than the original thing. But the problem is all these groups are all these different colors, and I think I would like, let's just say like, let's just say that this is, I was not as well prepared, but let's just say that like, there's all these groups are kind of not in the right shape, that right now that's what they look like. They're just not in the right shape. And what we're doing in this video is we're talking about how to bring these groups, rather than being a mishmash where this, like the traditional stuff is trying to oppose all the other stuff. What we want to do is we want to bring every faction into harmony with tradition so that we can kind of basically, so that what we're trying to do is we're trying to enrich the tradition, but not enrich it, but in a way that is orthodox. So we're going to essentially do what always has been done, which is which is the logic of the incarnation, of Jesus taking on flesh, of Our Lady of Guadalupe taking on cultures, of the Catholic Church taking on the culture of the Roman Empire, becoming the Roman Catholic Church. This is the pattern of how Catholic things work. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so, hey, we have the traditional Catholic synthesis, like normal Catholic thought, and then we're trying to make it the same pattern. We're trying to add, as a supportive foundation, we're trying to add this enriched human functioning. And you can see how what we're trying to do is we're trying to enrich this human functioning. We're trying to have all the use of the faculties, which is emphasized by this multicolored thing, the use of the faculties that we had on that chart. It's meant to support the traditional spiritual life, so that it becomes like we become kind of like another Mary, because we get this strengthened human nature from all these practices that helps us better bear the divine life of God, in ourselves. So this is what this whole process is about. It's kind of a whacked out way of showing the metaphor for this, but that's what this is about. And what that ultimately does is it's ultimately the transformation of the church into another phase. It's ultimately this transformation of, we have this time period after the Second Vatican Council where you get all these, it's kind of like, in a way, I'm saying this in broad categories, I'm not talking against the church, but in a way, we have less of an emphasis on the traditional liturgy, less of an emphasis on tradition. We've kind of had some ways, it's like we've kind of lost, in some ways, we could broadly say we've lost touch with tradition in some ways. I'm not saying a controversial statement that. And instead, we've got all these other things that have kind of filled the void. But now what's meant to happen is that we're meant to kind of fully, and it's kind of messy, but so what we're doing is meant to unbend all that stuff, get that stuff into order so that it can become a foundation, a proper, fully digested foundation for the tradition, of properly digested enrichment, so that we can go through those phases of development. Because the thing is, what's happening is, the traditionalists are saying, hey, this church doesn't look like the traditional church. And the modernists are saying, hey, like, great, like, make the church into mush, because it's like the modernist thing is to dissolve things. And that's kind of like this phase 2 for the caterpillar, becoming the butterfly. It's phase 2. But the thing is, that's not good in itself. We have to understand that it is a process. Like, so the thing is that we have to stop it's not good to dissolve the church. It's not good to change the church, but we have to go through a thing of where the church, whether or not we've been, as in traditional circles, we talk about infiltration. This is about the filtration of all things. And so what we're doing is we're filtrating everything. And so that's the whole point of the redemption of the different factions. And so that's really what's going on here. So that's what we're trying to do. So this video is going to be the introduction to how we deal with the church factions. But basically the whole goal is to be able to have the church go through this phase where it's like, we have to understand that the post-Vatican II era, like this progression of the caterpillar is like the pre-Vatican II church, the Second Vatican Council is like we go into this pupa, and then we have, this kind of thing of like, the traditional view is like, hey, we need to go back to what was the caterpillar that was orderly, this orderly segmented thing that was, and had a good, it was a structured thing. It was good. Caterpillar was good. But that thing is kind of dissolving in a way. But doesn't seem good. And so we have this period where there's this conflict. And so this is the point of this this section of our series, is to understand how do we really become this kind of new church without becoming a weird church or without becoming a modernist church. How do we become an authentic church rather than a traditional church that's trying to stay at the caterpillar phase, or a modernist church that's saying, great, that where the caterpillar is dissolving. It's like, no, it's about this pupa, that's going to give this cocoon, that's going to give this order. And we need to understand that's what we're doing here, is giving the cocoon, giving the instructions for how do we go through this phase and bring about this transformed church so that this can work better for everybody. So hopefully this is helpful as an introduction to dealing with the factions inside the church, and we'll make that in the next video, how to specifically do it.